So how big of a problem is the national debt? Obviously, debt, it's not a good thing, economically speaking, but as of right now in 2024, the national debt really isn't a problem, and it's probably not going to be a problem for the next decade at least. Now, this is complicated. The national debt, it's not like a person's individual debt. There's many more factors to consider that completely alter the calculus. So today, to help gain a complete understanding, we're going to take a look and try to understand these macro factors, see who owns the national debt, where all this money goes, how much the government actually collects in revenue, and finally, what are the actual tangible ramifications of all this debt? Alright, so the national debt just passed $35 trillion. Here's a fun yet depressing visual on how it compares to the rest of the world's debt. In total, the US accounts for about a third of all global debt. China is at 15%, Germany, France, UK, all at around 3%. Next, you have to take this debt and compare it to the GDP, because of course, larger countries can support a higher amount of nominal debt. But before directly stacking up debt to GDP, we need to remove the debt that the government owes to itself. The Fed, for example, buys and sells treasuries all the time to control money supply, and this is one of those ways that government debt is different than a household debt. So the more accurate figure here is debt held by private investors, and this number is at $23 trillion. Plotting this against GDP, this is what we get. We can see how it has flowed over time. Specifically during recessions like 2008, COVID, government spending tends to increase, and that directly increases the debt at a pretty significant rate. And today we are at a private debt to GDP ratio of 80%. That's high, but other countries do have it worse, and they haven't collapsed quite yet. When looking at the actual budget, this year, the United States collected $4.39 trillion in government revenue coming from these various taxes. Over the same time, we spent $6.28 trillion. The top three sources of this spending include Social Security, Medicare, and interest payments on the debt. That's now the third highest expense in the budget. Looking at who actually owns all this debt, the vast majority are domestic, individual, and institutional investors. The next biggest group, as we already touched on, is the government itself. Then we get to the foreign holders of U.S. debt. Here, Japan is the largest country with a value of $1.1 trillion, followed by China and the United Kingdom. But you can see here that basically every country, to some extent, invests in U.S. treasuries. And that in part is due to the status of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And this is a unique luxury America has that directly affects its debt and the dynamics around it. And what this means with a heavy level of simplification is in order to do international transactions, like say buy and sell oil, this is done in USD, meaning that countries need to have a certain amount of dollars on hand to conduct business. This creates an elevated level of demand for the US dollar compared to other currencies. Another similar adjacent factor is the safety and stability associated with the US dollar. Being that this is the world's reserve currency and it's backed by the full fate of the US government, it is essentially viewed as a risk-free investment and a fantastic place to park excess capital. And again, this privilege creates demand for US dollars. But the key thing here is even this privileged position can only delay the inevitable. Eventually, the debt will erode at this confidence and the demand for US dollars will diminish. When this exactly happens, we don't know. It depends on a lot of factors like the growth of the US economy, along with externalities such as better alternatives to put your money. And once the foundation begins to crack, the flood comes very fast. In very simple terms, once a debt gets too high, or confidence in the US system declines, or there's a better alternative, financing the debt becomes more expensive. When demand for dollars declines, or the perceived risk increases, investors demand more compensation for their money. This increases the cost of debt, which puts the country further into debt, making the whole thing more expensive until ultimately you have runaway inflation, flight of capital out of the country, and the whole system implodes. Now, none of this is inevitable. Congress can rein in spending, the economy can grow faster than the debt. That's probably the most realistic way to get out of this predicament. Also, inflation is your friend in this situation because it makes the value of your debt less. And not to mention, the stability of America doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. But let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed, I appreciate a like, subscribing, and I'll see you guys in the next one.